I'm delighted to welcome on stage with me Professor Dame Wendy Hall, Regius Professor of Computer Science at the University of Southampton, and Karen Silverman, who is CEO and founder of the Cantellus Group. A key player in the field, Wendy was co-chair of the UK government's AI review and is the first skills champion for AI in the UK. In May 2020, she was appointed as chair of the Ada Lovelace Institute, and she joined the BT Technology Advisory Board in January 21. Karen is a leading voice on practical governance strategies for AI and frontier technologies. She's a highly experienced lawyer by training. She has founded an experts-based consulting group to advise leaders in business and government on how better to oversee and manage AI and other technologies. I'm Dr. Kate Devlin. I'm Reader in Artificial Intelligence and Society at King's College London, and I'm Director of Advocacy and Engagement on the Trusted Autonomous Systems Hub, a UKRI-funded project. I'll be moderating today. So I'm going to start just by letting you talk. So we're still very much in the infancy of the metaverse. Can I ask both of you just to take a moment each to outline how, at this stage, you view its potential? Wendy, would you like to go first?
Oh, okay.
Or Karen, I don't mind.
No, I'll go first. I've had COVID recently, so if I get incoherent, one of these two will pick up for me. I've still got the brain fog. Why I was interested, it looks like there's another big Metaverse event on, I think, in town today, so maybe people at CogX aren't that interested. I have been working in my lab at Southampton. We've had VR and AR, virtual reality and augmented reality demos for 30 years, right? It's just like AI, you know, this stuff comes in waves, and as the technology progresses, you can do more with it. And of course, I lived through the Second Life. Anyone remember Second Life? Yeah, okay, where's that? Well, of course, the issue about Second Life, it was, you know, great idea, but way ahead of its time in terms of what the technology could deliver. And it was launched, I remember going to a web conference in 1997 in Australia, where there was a huge Second Life. They were doing, all the universities in Australia had stands in Second Life. But this was such early days in the web, such early days. 97, it's like almost prehistory for the World Wide Web. And we didn't have the powerful computers, we didn't, any access to Second Life was incredibly clunky and difficult. So at the time, Tim Berners-Lee was talking about the semantic web and linked data, and that was where we were all looking at, was what was going on underneath the web. And we've learnt so much since then about the power of open standards, but also the danger of open standards. And I think that's something we've learnt from the web, and the lack of regulation or thoughts about regulation, ethics, societal values in the early days of the web have potentially led to us to where we are now, and we need to. And so it's going to be. So now we're into this wave of the metaverse. It's all hype at the moment. How many of you have actually been on a metaverse? I haven't bothered. I don't play games. I'm not interested. I'm certainly not getting. I can hardly walk. I have a walking stick out there. I'm not getting into putting goggles on to walk around the street. Youngsters, of course, will take to this like ducks to water, and that's part of the issue. So I think that we need to learn the lessons from the past, and we need to think about what we're trying to build here, and we have to set it, or what we might be trying to build, and what potential good outcomes are, because there are clearly, as with AI, as with the internet, there are huge opportunities and potentials for society, but there are major, major pitfalls if we get it wrong. And we grew up around a web that had open standards and was basically anyone can do what they like with it, which is partly where it's gone wrong, but also we've got the open standards, which means it all is interoperable. We're looking at a metaverse in walled gardens with major companies seeking to make money out of it, to use our data. There've been a lot of stories around on the back of Tech Week. The one I'll talk about that a bit more. The idea of physical digital twins, I'll talk about that a bit for another question. But we don't know what this thing is yet. We don't know what people are going to do with it or think about doing with it. And we've got to think about, and I'm going to hand over to Karen now, how we regulate something that is so embryonic, we don't know what we're regulating, but keeps people safe in the future. I'll stop there and hand over to...
So Karen, what do you think at this early stage about the metaverse and how you view the potential of it?
Well, I mean, exactly as you just said. I think we're at very early days. I think if we look back at how most of these technologies first are used, I mean, there's concepts around its utility in healthcare, which are spectacular, training, spectacular. The ability to simulate for not just in military uses, but in any kind of high risk, sort of first responder type environments or hazardous sort of job sites, spectacular. Educational uses with kids, spectacular. But the first commercial uses of these technologies are always going to be, and they are in the metaverse, gaming and porn, right? I mean, 100%. And the idea that we have to remind ourselves of that and be prepared to enjoy its benefits and its opportunities, but also start thinking about how some of the capabilities translate, right? And so one of the things that I spend a lot of time doing with our clients is sorting out what sorts of opportunities and risks are predictable, right? And what are we doing well? What are we not doing well? How is this like things we've seen before? How is this going to be different from things we've seen before? And there's a tendency to say, well, let's just say if it's illegal in the real world, we'll make it illegal in the metaverse. And that's just a completely insufficient answer. I think it's a really good start, but it's insufficient for a number of reasons that I think we all need to focus on. And one is that law enforcement is notoriously sort of various and uneven. In the US alone, there are tens of thousands of law enforcement agencies, applying differing standards with different jurisdiction and different kinds of remedial authorities. There's private litigation, so law enforcement is not one thing. Jurisdiction is not a concept that maps easily into the metaverse. And in part, I think the more tricky problem is that people will be going on to the metaverse specifically to have experiences that extend and exceed the experiences they can have in the world as we know it today. And that is going to challenge us as we think about what misuse looks like, right? I mean, when you think about gaming, Grand Theft Auto, which was, I think it's probably still the highest grossing game. So if I steal cars and run over a bunch of people in the metaverse, it's like, that's not misuse necessarily, unless I'm one of the people run over, maybe, but have I consented to that? I don't know. So we've got to kind of rethink how we're going to define harms, and we're not particularly good yet at we're good at identifying harms when someone physically assaults or hurts you, or when somebody actually takes a thing from you that you can describe and they didn't have a right to, right? Those are things that we can redress in the law. When someone psychologically harms you, and even if you have physiological effects, we don't really know how to deal with that, in existing either law enforcement, public law enforcement, or private contract or private litigation. So all of those issues, your work, Kate, in studying how the metaverse is going to impact humans from a mental health and physiological perspective, I think is fascinating, because we don't know, and we're going to need some way to figure it out.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we're still talking about something that's very disparate technologies that have some grand ideas, but they're not yet bringing it all together, and we have to look at how those will interoperate, and we have to look at the way that will eventually manifest. So, given that we have so many corporations that will be involved in this, do you think, and Karen, I think this is your sort of area, do you think the terms of service models are up to the task of producing the controls that we want? I mean, do they even work now?
I was going to say no, they're not, but we don't really have a better model yet. And they don't in part because of this anticipatory problem, but also in part because contract law almost everywhere is amoral, right? I mean, if you breach, you pay what the cost of the breach is. I mean, it's not, there's nothing in contract. I don't think there's anything in terms of use sort of experience that we've had would suggest that it's up to the task of what's about to happen. I mean, it's, as you point out, it's barely sufficient for what we're experiencing now in whatever we're calling Web 2.0.
Yeah.
But, So, and it's not realistic. If I agree or because I should back up. Terms of use are contracts, right? And that's all they are. They're not moral instruments in any way. I think one of the things we need to sort through is where does public interest come in to sort of shape or constrain what we're capable of contracting for or contracting away. So can I contract away my right not to be enslaved? I don't know. I mean, we need to decide that, because in a world that's all about fact and fiction and kind of muddling the two, there may be circumstances under which that is just an experience that one might contract to have. We might have a public interest in not permitting that sort of activity in the metaverse or in certain of the worlds. And so that's it's one example of any number of examples that we don't have answers to.
And you've co-authored a report called Into the Metaverse: Technology, Legal Implications and Actions. And I really like this quote when you talk about the potential experiences. You say we should assume that all the behaviors, assets and disputes that we encounter in the natural world will also take place in AR and VR, as well as new dimensions and capabilities. And I like these examples: automated profiling, flying, transforming and invisibility. So one of the questions you raise is...
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, right. I mean, is the conduct occurring in that private platform, and you've touched on this already, is that really in public? And how does that approach what we do?
Well, I mean, the answer is no. These are private networks that we contract to participate in, right? So they feel very public, and we experience them as public because either our true identities or our avatars or one of several identities we might have, which there's a whole other mental health issue, is how do I track all my realities?
Of that, yeah.
Right? These are private platforms on which we've all chosen to participate with some level of visibility and visage to others, right? And we should not expect the same sorts of protections that we expect out in the square here, where we are in public in the way that civil liberties laws would suggest.
Yeah. So, Wendy, that brings me on to, you mentioned digital twins, this idea that we can have an exact copy of ourselves, but one that lives this purely digital life. And we're already seeing some examples of this mimicking real-world systems. And presumably this is going to require governance in the form of very specific technical standards. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I don't...
Okay, you don't have to give us the technical standards.
I wish. I mean, as I say, there have been some great stories out this week. Most of them are hype. The stuff you're reading that's come out in Tech Week, Lambda, it's just hype, right? You'll have a digital twin of yourself in 10 years. Nah. Right, be lucky while I'm still around in this planet, if luck is what we're talking about here, because so there's so many things to say. I'll come back to digital twins, but we have to set all this in the context of other things that are happening. There's the whole Web3 hype bandwagon, and to me, the metaverse is one of the reasons why we need Web3. Now, if you don't know what Web3 is the idea that we take our data back. We are empowered to manage our own data rather than giving it, sharing it, whatever verb you want to use, with the big hyperscalers, datagopolis, where it is at the moment, completely distributed between. We sign those terms and conditions and that's it, it's gone, right? And of course, we get a return on our investment. We like it, it's why we do it. This is the sheep thing, right? Everyone else is doing it, what's wrong? And actually, it gives we get a search engine. You couldn't use the web without a search engine. We get a shop, which is fantastic. It delivers stuff the next day. I mean, what's not to like about this stuff? The point is, it's what it's doing to us, society, and democracy. Right? These are big issues, and the metaverse is all that on steroids. So Web3 is the idea, and Tim Berners-Lee, I always follow what he's doing because I was going to say he got it right with the web. Actually, he got it partly right with the web. But we're now in a position where we need to sort of, he talks about fixing or re-decentralizing the web, and that's what he's trying to do with Solid. There are a lot of other people out there that have jumped on the Web3 bandwagon. It doesn't exist yet, but the idea that you will manage your data from cradle to grave in something that might be called a pod or a wallet or a vault, or this is the model, and you or your agents or your trusted third-party lawyers or bankers or whoever it's going to be manages your data for you. And there you're immediately into, well, we've got a whole new world of people who are going to make money out of us and another whole hyperscaler, but that maybe is the yin and the yang of this sort of stuff. But that, I don't see how we manage the metaverse without something like that. Otherwise, we are into absolute chaos. How do we prove who any avatar belongs to, who's responsible for its behavior, what happens to the data that your avatar or your digital twin creates with other avatars, and if you buy something in the metaverse, be it a block of flats or can you buy an ice cream in the metaverse? I have no idea.
Someday
that my digital twin may like because it's sentient and likes ice cream, maybe.
Who knows?
Load of rubbish. Anyway, so so there's that. You've also got to set this in the context of what's happening with artificial intelligence. So whilst I say this sort of notion that the Google thing is sentient, we are getting closer, and we can begin to see how we can create software, machines, that are actually can do things in many cases better than we can. We aren't near general AI or AGI, whichever acronym you want to use yet, but we can see how we could get there. And we had Martin Rees, the Astronomer Royal. I'm not quite sure. I know Martin quite well. I'm not quite sure what he knows about this stuff, but he's echoing Stephen Hawking, who said just before he died, and Martin was saying in his interview yesterday, if we let this happen, so the machines become more intelligent than us, then that is the end of the human race. Okay, so we are in an existential issue here. Okay, so we have to think that through. So you've got Web3 and the whole issue of AI regulation, which we're still exploring. Yeah. As to what's the right thing to do. And then you come to digital twins. Now, I'm just like, you can see huge potential with the metaverse in terms of the things you said, high, very risky, dangerous environments, helping people learn and do things. You could argue that flying an aeroplane at the moment is a metaverse, but that's a sort of philosophical issue. But we do try very hard to stop planes crashing by a lot of regulation. And we need to think about that in this world. But just to come back to it, there's a lot of potential for digital twins. This is the idea of having a physical thing, have a digital simulation. And this idea of designing bridges and things like that is very powerful. And we're moving into a world of cyber-physical infrastructure, where we'll have the cyber world and the physical world increasingly interacting. There are people working on digital twins of human beings. And you can imagine that in the future, that will be a possibility. And we can begin to do that with the avatars today. But what does that mean? And you start to talk about, how many of these are you going to have, and which world are you going to be in? And are we going to have walled gardens, or are we going to have some standards for interoperability that anyone who creates a digital twin that you could inhabit, or whatever the verb is, what are the standards they're going to have to use? What are the regulations they're going to have to abide? There's so many issues here, and if we just go into it blindly and let the companies do what they wish, then we will end up destroying ourselves, I think.
Yeah. And I guess I want to add that I think the companies that have profit motives, that's sort of one thing, and there are ways to regulate companies, and we've done it, and you start to see around the world in the AI space and in the data protection space, and that's the other thing about the metaverse, is none of it works without massive volumes of personal data being collected. That's how it works. And today anyway, that's how it works. So we know, so I think there's a regulation that's going to apply to the providers of these services and the people who provide services on the metaverse. Everybody from luxury good items to ice cream purveyors, look forward to that. But we have to talk about the people too, right? When you talk about community rules and when you look at what's gone on in the internet and how, early days of the internet involved a lot of, and continues to involve, to your point about the threats to democracy and the misinformation generally, it's community standards that we never applied, right? Or that we applied after that horse was well out of the barn. And that is its own separate risk. So we've got the regulation around companies and governments and lawful uses and unlawful uses, or expected uses and unexpected uses. And then we've got to essentially, as each human being, become much more active. I like to say we need to become active, guardians of our experience, right? What experiences do we want? What will we accept? What do we want our children exposed to? What kinds of communities do we want to live in? And we have to be affirmative about that. If we're not, we're going to see the same thing happen in the metaverse that has happened and we may anyway, which has happened online, which is, when you start putting synthetic content together with sentiment analysis, together with the ability to broadcast anonymously, trouble happens, right? And we're going to get that version of trouble too, but in these much more immersive ways that are going to be much harder for any individual to distinguish from real experience, real memory, real sensation. And so what that does to our brains and what that, how that, it's not, I think, I think the metaverse is going to be harder to turn off once we go there.
Absolutely.
And that's a real
danger.
It's a real, and we just have to have some personal discipline and responsibility around that. We're not teaching it that way yet. And one of the things we need to start doing is bringing that into, I think, everyday conversation, right? Around, how do you bring that into your home?
But I would just say that I think I agree with you about the metaverse can be difficult to turn off, but actually the internet's difficult to turn off.
Right, and we're not doing a great job of it. And we don't do a great job of it. It's hard enough to put your phone down.
Yeah,
right.
And whether it's metaphysically or physically, it's hard to shut down the internet because actually we're totally dependent, not just we as individuals, but our countries, our companies, our ecosystems are, as we saw in COVID, even more so now.
Yeah.
So, and the metaverse would be, it's that on steroids.
And with that in mind, Wendy, because you've looked at sort of what can happen geopolitically with these kind of things. Do you want to talk a little about that?
Well, I was going to pick up nicely on what Karen was saying because there's a new book called Four Internets. Well, it's not that new now. It came out last year. That Kieran O'Hara and I wrote. And we talk about why do we say four internets? So, well, very briefly, we have the basic standard open internet, which is, the interoperability technical standards, which is what makes it global. And if those go, and I can tell you they're under threat, then we don't have an interconnected internet, and then actually you won't have interconnected metaverses, and all bets are off then as to what might happen. But at the moment we have that, and we need our governments to ensure that stays if we want a global internet. But the other three we talk about is the commercial internet in the US, where you've got very powerful companies that lobby Washington for the support and laws and regulation that helps them grow. Nothing wrong with making money, right, on the internet, but it's the value system. And then there's the free speech thing on top of that, which support, And then you move into Europe, where we are, where it's our lead, and we still follow the EU on this. We may break away in the UK, but we aren't at the moment. It's all data protection led. And if that's followed through for the metaverse, then it will be a European metaverse, right? That you have to, if you follow these issues through, because other parts of the world will not adhere to our values necessarily. our cultural values. And then the fourth internet is China, all right, which is actually the biggest on it, and they are influencing a lot of the rest of the world, Africa in particular, the South Pacific, a lot of South America, bits of Europe, and we call that in the book the paternal internet. You could call it the surveillance internet, because the Chinese government demands the right to see any data, know who anybody is, and actually it's a safer place to be, as long as you don't value freedom of speech. It's a much safer place to be. Imagine the social credit scoring system in the metaverse. Now, those values will go into the metaverse. And the hard thing, we were tackling this with AI as well, because if we're trying to negotiate global AI regulation, you've got those different cultural values all competing for what the regulation should and shouldn't be. And what do we agree on? And there is a moral bit to this as well. We've sort of grown up with the idea you can do what you like on the internet, because nobody can find out who you are on the internet. And that's not what we do in real life, as you said. If someone beats you up out there, they'll get arrested and put in jail, hopefully, right?
Eventually.
If they beat you up on the internet, that's probably not going to happen. But I'll just say, I've forgotten what. Oh yeah, in the book we also talk about the Russia, which is we don't give it the credit of being a fifth internet, but it's that we call Russia the spoiler model. It's the let's do things to other people because we can. And we also talk about India as a swing state. India is a very large country, and what it does in this space, it's very clever people. Lots of big companies developing there. What India does in this space will also have a big determinating factor on what happens globally.
And all of this, of course, ties into this what Karen touched upon. There is no single jurisdiction here. When you tie that in with the idea of multiple thousands and thousands of different jurisdictions, and corporate governance, this is
right. And so
very unwieldy.
So to whom do you appeal for redress outside the terms of use, which may or may not be particularly effective? And then the other issue, I think it's very hard to separate data protection, AI policy, which is very use case specific, I think, actually, and then cybersecurity, because to your point about, any large commercial, even small, commercial entity in the digital world right now is dealing not only with threats from individuals but state actors, and that will be a metaverse. So these different internets and these different metaverses will be in competition with one another, and so it's a very and using technologies that are literally designed to deceive, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way, deceive. It could also be in a bad way, but in a sense to cause your brain to believe it's having an experience it's not having. And in a way, when we think about regulation over the last, however many millennia, the expectation is that if you're of sound mind and body over the age of 18, and in some cultures before the age of 65, you're not entitled to any special protections. You're presumed to be a fully functioning, capable adult, and we focus higher levels of scrutiny around, what happens to children, some categories of minorities and some cultures, and maybe some elders, right? Or people who are diagnosed with disease states, right? I think in the metaverse we're all vulnerable, right? That like an able-bodied 24-year-old, adult with no other underlying conditions is vulnerable to being deceived, tricked, confused, and in fact that's kind of the experience you're signing up for, right? So it's not even a product defect. So do we need to rethink regulation in a world where we can't just simply say, well, let's just protect the kids online? We got to kind of protect everybody online, yeah. Right? It's a totally different element that we're now dealing with. And we see this with AI in some contexts anyway, but we will, to your point about steroids, we're not only going to see it, we're going to feel it on the metaverses, or in the metaverse as well.
Yeah, just imagine, when you go to sleep, things might be happening to you on the internet, but you're not actively doing things on the internet. In the metaverse, your avatar or digital twin could be doing all sorts of stuff you haven't got a clue about. If someone hacks it, I just think the whole thing is terrifying, personally.
But you don't even need to hack your avatar. I just have to hack your likeness. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well-
I could develop an avatar that looks just like you, that
Yeah.
you might be able to tell the difference because you would never say such a thing that I just made it say.
But,
But
That's
you
like
wouldn't know that.
deep
right?
fakes, but in a 3D.
And the potential for scary stuff is quite huge.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But I think really we have to think about regulation differently.
So I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking, I think we need to license people to build the metaverse. I think they should be. I don't think they should.
Certification's
just be
not enough. We need a license.
No, I think people should have a license, don't you? I'm just beginning to talk myself into thinking that.
I don't know that I agree with that, but I do, but I like to think about it. And I often think, when people ask me, like, well, what do I need to know about AI or the metaverse? And I was like, it's a little bit like driving, which is you need to know how to operate it and not kill other people.
And I would say flying a plane too.
Or flying a plane.
Yeah.
But most people don't know how to build a car, fix a car. You just need to know how to drive it and not kill other people. And planes, not very many people know how to fly planes. I don't know.
The cynic in me wonders if we're going to license this, do we leave it to the big tech companies because they're not doing a smashing job?
No,
with everything,
no, we don't leave it to
No. I do think there have to be, whether it's licensing or not, I think there have to be ways to effectively remove bad actors from environments. And to your point, there's not a tremendous track record on this.
Yeah.
You know.
Can I just open this up to the audience? Does anyone have a question about this at all? Yes, in the front row. I think we have a microphone coming to you.
Hi, thank you for the session. Before the internet, we sort of had walled gardens, right, with CompuServe and AOL, and all the talk on the metaverse is exactly the same, these sorts of walled gardens. Can we not jump that phase by forcing companies to adopt open standards as they evolve, and that means everyone
we need
has to
the
do
Tim
it?
Berners-Lee for the metaverse then, or doesn't have to be one person, but we need that moment for the metaverse. And the worry is that this is obviously such big business now that and it's moving so potentially fast that it may be we can't wait for that to happen. But it's just like with digital twins. Well, I say no. We don't have agreed interoperable standards for building digital twins. Most digital twins that are being built at the moment, just of physical things, not of people. That's much harder. But of physical things like a company's operate, like the nuclear power, the SMR, the new small nuclear reactors that they're building. They're doing a digital twin of that, and it's good idea for all the for all the safety and reasons. But they're not interoperable with other things. And there was talk in the UK of a national digital twin. That's still sort of in the background, but nobody can think about how to actually make that happen. There's just so many actors involved, and now we're moving on to cyber-physical infrastructure. But we really need all this stuff pulled together so that when there's a crisis, everything interoperates, so you can work out where to send the fire engines or the police or to sort things out. And we are nowhere near that agreement. And this is just happening sort of in parallel with all that stuff and fast.
Yeah.
So
and I think it's a different, in the US right now, there's a bunch of proposed legislation that sort of would mandate interoperability, but not in the way you mean it. And it's meeting a lot of resistance because it's actually really hard to do.
Yeah.
Right? And it opens up threat surfaces like beyond, right? And so it by itself, I don't think works. I think in combination with a much better cybersecurity, much better kind of redress model, you could get there. But right now, just requiring interoperability between Google and Apple is easy to say, really hard to do.
And with the web, the internet and the web, the two organisations that have kept those standards open and forced the companies to actually use them, because various big companies have tried to pull away from the international standards, are the IETF and W3C, both of which are volunteer organisations that run on complete shoestrings and could collapse tomorrow.
Right.
And that's when I talk to governments, I say, this is what you've got to protect. But you shouldn't not take over but you've got to protect. And there's a very interesting battle. The International Telecoms Union, I don't know how many people know about this, who really would like to manage the internet and have a big Chinese influence. They've had a Chinese president for 10 years. There are two people standing for the next president of the ITU. They manage all the telecommunications that make the underlying infrastructure of the internet. The two people standing, there's a Doreen Bogdan, I can't remember her name, from America, who's great, and there's a chap from Russia who's backed by the Chinese. Those are the two people standing for the president of the ITU, potentially for 10 years. I leave you with that thought.
Okay, any other questions?
The UK and US, please vote for Doreen.
I wanted your views about Facebook sort of stepping back and saying, we won't have our own metaverse, we'll have one metaverse. Because looking at how do you see it? Do you see it as the parallel to the internet? Or do you see it as a parallel to eBay versus Amazon? Because, like you said, the internet's broken, it's not great. So
No, I'm not going to let you get away with that. Right, the internet, the underlying internet is not broken. What we've done with it, and what the evolution of the web on the internet, there's all sorts of things wrong with that. I'm not going to let you get away with the internet is broken, because it isn't at the moment.
So now that we've learned from it, could we not have multiple metaverses where we try to fix what's broken or how the application of the internet was broken, and have multiple metaverses?
Some of them. Yeah.
Or do you buy into the idea that there shouldn't be many and there should be just one? What's your view about that?
Well, shall I go and then you can tell me what's possible? I was sitting here thinking about, is it possible to have one metaverse? Right? And if we had one metaverse, what would that feel like? I've read many science fiction books. There's a book, one of my favourites as a teenager was The Gods Themselves by Asimov.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, where there are actually two worlds, physical and, he didn't use the word digital, but I don't know, metaphysical or something.
Yeah.
And as I remember, sex happened in the metaphysical, as I remember from the book. I must reread it. It's a very good book. The first part is about the physical world, the second part's the metaphysical, or the digital, we might say today, and the last part's the Gods Themselves, it's called. And it influenced me a lot. And that, to me, is like you've got a global metaverse where all sorts of things, and you might have, things happen there and stuff happens in the physical world. And what does this mean to have? What would it mean if we had one metaverse? But also, the idea of lots of little walled garden metaverses is a complete nightmare, I think, because where are the optimizations and the big efficiencies and the power of it? I mean, Tim Berners-Lee with the web, obviously the internet was there first, then Tim built the web, and it was, as he said at the Olympic Games, for everyone. The idea was he gave it away so everyone could use it, and we'd build all these wonderful things on it. You could do the same with the metaverse, but we now know that could go horribly wrong. So I mean, you just got to try and think about. My favourite phrase at the moment is leading from the future. I was taught this by a very wise man recently. And I see the T-shirt say, what is it? What's going to happen in the next 10 years? Or what's the T-shirt say? I can't remember now exactly.
Someone has to turn around and show the back
10
of the
years.
Yeah.
Who's got a T-shirt on?
Anyway, yes, if you turn around, we'll know what you're saying. There you are.
How do we get the next 10 years right?
Thank you.
Thank you. I would say, how do we get the next 30, 50 years right? Yeah. Right, that's what we're actually thinking about here. Because 1989 was when Tim put the protocols up for the web, so that's 33 years now, which is when the internet sort of became available to all of us. And we got to think at least 30 years ahead, if not 50, in terms of what type of world are we trying to build here, what type of society, and then work back to what we should be doing today to make sure we're on the right sort of path. That's what web science was meant to be all about when we were looking at the study of the web from a socio-technical point of view. So I love this. I've got you've got a lawyer and a computer scientist here. We need the ethicists. aren't you?
We could talk all day.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it would be
We've
great.
only got 30 seconds.
Oh, no.
Sorry, you have the last word.
Well,
No, I don't want the last word. I'm just saying that this, if you put a science fiction writer, a computer scientist, and a lawyer together, yeah, we could.
we could talk.
Well, I want to finish by just asking you, what do you think the one step we have to take is, if we have to pick one thing that we need to work towards, what would it be? Would it be the standards? Would it be
More of this, actually.
more talking about this?
Yeah, absolutely. And with citizen engagement, more of this sort of thing.
So you just took the word out of my mouth. So citizen, I hate consumer, I hate user, as how we describe the people who are engaged in this, right? And we've got to get a lot more
Would you accept
active in thinking.
prosumer?
Prosumer?
Yeah.
No.
I quite like prosumer.
I want sumer. Well, I mean, it's an interesting term.
I didn't invent it at all. It's in the, but prosumer sort of means you're not just consuming, you're actually putting in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think citizen. There's there's some Athenian model that we need to recapture, right? That if we're and so my one thing would be, how do we enable active engagement from people who are designing, prosuming, and building these tools to the point where we can be planning for the future, but like, where do we want to be? What kind of experiences do we want? How do we reward and incentivize people who are doing this well? I mean, that's the other thing, is we don't really have a great mechanism for encouraging and incentivizing this harder, messier work, and that's something we could be working on.
Never forget the matrix. We're just the bioenergy for the machines.
On that optimistic note, thank you very much, Karen and Wendy.
Thank you.